I am standing in here as a panelist, though I'm not one, and there is a reason for it. So, another friend of mine, Khadija Jamal from Pakistan, sent me an audio file saying that she needs to be excused from actually appearing on screen and talking about her projects because she's had an emergency. So, she sent me a voice recording and requested me to sort of run the slides and play the recording. I mean, she probably expected me to explain what it is, but I give up at that point. So I'm going to play the recording and I'll run the slides through so that we can all hear what she's trying to say. It's a very short thing. So can we start? Yeah, and the voice.
With you, I have an issue, an emergency. There's been a death, and so I won't be able to present because I have to go there. Um, I just want to let you know that the presentations I haven't written much. The whole idea of presenting those two projects were because I was the client's rep and managing the project from the client side, and just wanted to show the two different contexts and the two different types of architecture, because it also talks about not just the historical relevance and the contextual relevance, but about materiality and diversity in terms of people who actually constructed it from different parts of the world, in the sense that the stonemasons in the stone were from Syria, Aleppo, and the brickworks were undertaken by Indian and Pakistanis and Kashmiris. So, and how the whole project came together and became a pride. So, each of these projects are a pride for even the people who are doing it. And I'm just giving a very short gist in this small time that I have to convey to you on this little note. Of course, there are many more things to it, but basically, how these projects also, when it becomes a pride for the people who are making it, who are designing it, um, over the long term, look at issues of maintenance as well. Even in terms of investment for maintenance, the equipment for those heights, um, um, putting that as part of project budget, how that makes a difference. And then I have a short thing about my work that I did in northern areas, which are very vulnerable to all sorts of natural disasters like landslide, while earthquake is common in many places, and then the debris flow, and how people who come in the harm ways and how we do the mapping. But trying to show that how different stakeholders then kind of bring an opportunity of that, take an opportunity of that disaster, and then maybe the whole architectural scene out there actually changes, which is not very sensitive to that particular ecological environment. How, and then my last two slides, last two or three slides, I've just put in those words. What I want to say, actually, to say a lot, but through these projects also, and what does repair and maintenance really mean? But at the end of the day, all of this boils down to the quality of life of the people. And if, as architects, we see that, and can we then be influencers uh, to our clients, to our whoever the patrons are, or um, the builders? Can we? Because you very well know that even if when we look at the MEP stuff, I mean, I'm not even going to get into those sustainability jargons and things, but as the quality of life of the people, whatever is around, what do we see? And then when we talk about stakeholders, it's or like stakeholders who are multi-owners, who have little of their own shacks, how that as a cityscape then, or a rural scape, what does it look like? What does it do to those people? These, in this age and time, the materiality, is it very kind of temporary materials? What does it do to when we again talk about carbon related stuff? Because if we keep changing those things, not repairing it, not maintaining it, what does it all do and harm the environment, the health? Um, One other thing that I was trying to say in there is, how do we create that kind of a pride for architects that in their practice they kind of look at maintenance and repair as part of the building process and keep educating everybody accordingly. I mean, if there's pride there, then only we can bring it to the um, architectural education institutions um, while talking about materiality. But overall, the overall thinking that I have when I show the projects, when I've written all this, is that if central to all of this is the quality of life, then maybe we can achieve this. I'm sorry I'm putting this on you because you can just kind of briefly mention what I've tried to say, but I really am sorry that I. But this is not in my hands, as you can very well imagine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you, Rahul, for inviting, and thank you for whole team to organize. Uh, I'm a conservation architect, what I say, and I also put my title conservation architect. But I started doing conservation since 91, more than 3 decades. But in my life, I think I rather say like I did lots of repair than conservation. You can say repair architect, but it does not sound good, maybe. So I will leave with that for now. Uh, so my presentation is a little bit about the earthquake effect in 2015 and some reconstruction efforts, some of the examples what we did. And I have a small story about the living culture which is related with the monuments. So this is the temple I'm going to talk, the temple which is during the earthquake. So the person who took this photograph, I have to say, is a very brave man. Everybody is running towards the open space, but he is taking photographs. And it took me like a couple of months to find this photograph. I found this in the internet, but I don't know who is the photograph. It took couple of months. Actually, it was not Nepalese. It was the Canadian tourist who is visiting the Patan Darbar Square. So this is the same temple before the earthquake. And you can see the temple was totally grounded in the earthquake. So after the earthquake in 2015, in the Patan city where I live, one of the old heritage sites, the recovery of cultural heritage was considered from the very beginning, initiated by the Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust with the help of local community. So in Patan, most of the people living in and around the square are still local inhabitants who live there for generations, keeping the monuments in use and alive. Thus, they are easily accessible. In the case of disaster, people usually help at the place where they are, and But after some time, as a human nature, they are prone to go back to their home as family comes first in the time of crisis. In contrast, the local community stays at the site within the affected area because they live there, is their home. So this is why they react immediately. Local people rush to save the important elements from the rubble. You can see in the first picture that was immediately after the earthquake. After like 45 to 45 minutes after the earthquake, they, because we also have the risk of theft. They knew like, the which parts are more vulnerable to theft, so they rescue those things. So more than 350 people like army, police, local inhabitants helping to rescue the objects from the rubble. So all the rescued artifacts were stored in the one of the museum courtyard just opposite this event area, and it became the huge like pile of the rubble which is collected from the rescued area. Of course, it was not easy to manage, segregate the pieces as of the different temple put in the different pieces due to the size of the helper or rescue who is rescuing the elements. So they just dumped in the courtyard, which I think that's fine. We can always sort it out. And of course, it was not easy to sort it out because it's all mixed of the 6 different temples, not only one temple. So in the second picture, you can see we have the wood carvers who are slowly assembling the pieces, finding from the rubble and repairing them as well. So after timber elements were salvaged, bricks were also removed to open the one of the temple, not the first temple which I was showing. And in second picture, you can see the puja ritual after the cleanup of the site allows devotees worship again after the disaster. Despite the lack of roofing and housing, the idol was still worshipped. Religious authenticity and the value were not depending on the lost architectural, historical, and the material authenticity. Since 2015, the monument at the Patan Darbari Square have been conserved and reconstructed with enormous effort following the damage and the devastation after the series of the earthquake. The collaboration work between the Trust and the Department of Archaeology, in coordination with the local craftsmen, made a significant contribution in this respect with the help of the local community. So here you can see the result of one of the temple which I saw in the beginning. So the last picture is after the rebuilding. For the recovery of cultural heritage, after a natural disaster, several factors decisive, such as preservation professionals, conservation scientific research, the availability of the building material, pre-earthquake documentation, and a long-term commitment of financial support. And most importantly, the availability of the craftsmen who are familiar with traditional construction technologies and the heritage. Here, wood carvers are repairing carefully on the transaction area between new and the old pieces to harmonize the appearance of the damage, one of the door bracket. In earlier centuries, it would have been mandatory that these craftspeople replace all damaged components as they believe it is not auspicious to reuse broken pieces in the God's house. So which is still in practice largely. Only a handful of cases are following what we are doing, repairing damaged parts and reuse as much as possible historic elements. Not working. So now I want to come back to my short story, which is from the temple which I saw in the beginning. And this sculpture had been the focal element of worship of that temple. The earthquake not only displaced this masterpiece, but also caused significant damage. You can see on the first picture, the idol was cracked right in the middle. And in the middle, we did some reinforcement to stabilize the statue. And the last one is after the repair. We thought repair structure can be against or for worshipping, but the installation of the repair sculpture in reconstruction temple was not accepted by the community and the priest. Religious belief demand that the ideal which is broken and chipped off ideal is unauspicious to be worshipped, but it was not logical for preservation experts since the original house of the god was rebuilt as before the earthquake. So after many discussions, I was able to convince the priest and the local community to keep the historic idol in the original location, but with the new replica besides it. So now you can see the replica which is in smaller size in front of the old one, and the laser artistic quality was made of the same deity which is contributed by the local community. It's not by us. So they made themselves to keep the temple in use. So the new replica is worshipped as it is complete statue without any cracks or chipped up parts, and thus how people believe it should be. So from the conservators' point of view or conservation architect's view, the repair sculpture is more important as it is original and historic, but it transformed into the piece of art. It lost its connection to the living culture and the community. The whole topic is particularly emotionally charged. Also, for me, it is hard to decide which object is important because when I go to the temple, the new one following my cultural belief, but glance falls on the old sculpture, which bears the traces of more than 3 centuries of history. So I want to come to the conclusion that the conservation challenges raised related to living heritage, local beliefs, and the value of a site, particularly if it is connected with the local community. The use of international conservation norms or theoretically written charters is often challenging for the local professionals. So in the Nepalese context, that the authenticity of material, fabric, or age are of less value compared to the religious authenticity. So conservation professionals have to consider conservation norms, but also can't ignore ongoing living tradition and culture, which are related to the monuments and might be the reason of their creation. So the big challenge in the Nepalese context is to balance the philosophy of conservation and the living culture as well as to compromise in order to preserve historic fabric or elements together with religious practice, local beliefs, and the value with the aim to keeping the monuments alive. Thank you. Oh, there is last one. So the conservation is for whom? So this always raised in our context with where the monuments are the living monuments.
I think it's okay. Yeah. Oh. All right. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone, and many thanks to Rahul and Snehanshu and Anisha for thinking of inviting me. Uh, uh, I actually felt confused because probably it is first time in 30 years that I am amongst such a large gathering of architects. I have not really practiced architecture. Uh, I started working with NGOs and slowly got into post-disaster humanitarian work, and then started working on reconstruction. So I work with People in Center. That's an organization we formed about 15 years back, and mostly have been working on post-disaster reconstruction. The whole idea was that we focus on enabling the disaster-affected communities, the households, to rebuild, repair, and retrofit their damaged houses. That has been the involvement for last almost 3 decades now. The houses that uh, people have been building have been mostly vernacular. People built their own houses with local artisans without any help of engineers or architects. And the houses which usually get damaged in the disasters, earthquake, tsunami, flood, cyclones, uh, all kinds of disaster we've been involved in. The reason of their poor performance is not merely the materials, but there are various factors involved in that. And lastly, I'm just to set the context of my presentation, that our involvement after the disaster is not really a choice of the communities. It is the situation which has overwhelmed them, and they are in a vulnerable state and seeking help from external agencies, and that's how we are there. Uh, when we are working with the community, the perspective that we have developed is that vernacular buildings have always given more control to the owners. They when they build, they design, they plan, they hire their own artisans. The whole process is decided by people themselves. Just because the earthquake or any other disaster has happened is not an excuse for us to take over the role which they have been playing. So we feel very conscious of that. Most of the time when houses get damaged, we find faults with the construction. Not only we find faults with the construction, we find fault with the owners who've been building those kind of houses, and we as an expert step in. So that is something we really resist. I also we also believe, we are conscious of the fact that while we are entering into the space of reconstruction and recovery, I'm very conscious of the fact that the housing stock that exists, and it's vulnerable housing stock. We've not really done much to improve that. It has been our failure. We have not really done anything, and now we come in as an expert, and we would want to do housing for people. So, very conscious of our failure of not fulfilling our responsibilities before disaster has happened. I also feel that we as an architect lack the knowledge of repairs. We actually do not know the materials people work with, the processes through which they work with, the way they access those materials, we don't understand. With all that awareness, most of the time I am nervous with when getting involved after disasters, and though agencies through which I work put me under quote as expert, but I have absolutely no idea what I would be doing and how we will do it, and I feel pretty nervous about how we will go about it and how things will turn out. Now, the idea about repairs and retrofitting is, I'm speaking in a very narrow sense. When we discuss repairs, repairs is simply trying to bring back the same performance of the building which it had earlier. While discussing retrofitting, we simply mean, again in a very narrow sense, the structural performance of the building, how we could improve it, make it much better than what it was before. About the situation usually after the disasters, when we are getting into reconstruction or repairs and retrofitting, is that there is a great sense of there is a feeling of helplessness amongst the community. They are out, they've lost their houses. There is also lack of confidence. And that is a big task we face, that people suddenly don't have confidence in the material they've been using for centuries, just because the kind of extent of disaster they have seen. And the feeling is of rejection of their own materials and their own knowledge, their own skills, their own construction practices. There is also external factors that are acting upon them. There are government policies, there are local political interests. A lot of dynamics comes into play after disasters. There is a whole socio-economic situation. The extent of poverty, the extent of dispossession is unbelievable if you go in some of these rural areas. There are complicated community social structures which have a role to play in how social housing happens, which we have absolutely no idea about. There are social norms, and these are not always the positive things. These also have very negative kind of, I mean, it's a very complex kind of a play of these factors. Now, talking about repairs, it's not just about the repairs, but also retrofitting that, most of the time after earthquake, we try to bring in. The picture that you see is a house from Afghanistan in Khost and Paktika. This is from one particular village in Spera district, where the stone houses were repaired, and then there is a wire mesh kind of getting installed for trying to make the whole behavior of the building like an integrated box. So you also see that red and blue kind of a wooden post installed. So lot of time the whole process is about enabling the agency of the owners themselves. They take up the repairs, they take up the retrofitting, not us. We facilitate with finance, with advice or guidance, but fully aware of the fact that we are only there to influence, probably, if we can, but they deal with us with a sense of authority, a sense of ownership. So the outcome is not necessarily what I as an architect would like or how it looks like. It may be something very different, but something what owner would want to see or would want to have or would want to live in. There is also a lot of effort that goes into trying to develop material to communicate, to discuss. Sometimes it is not very easy to communicate with the language, but a lot of posters, videos. Actually, in Nepal, we had a utility van converted into a video solar powered video vehicle, where a driver and an engineer will go every day to different villages, just discussing why buildings fail, why buildings get damaged, and what sort of things can be done. We've, as part of this whole education awareness, we also in Nepal, in Institute of Engineering, we installed a shock table test, conducted a test between of vernacular house as well as the houses which were repaired and retrofitted to see how they perform. And then the same videos we used for discussion and awareness. These are some of the pictures from both Nepal and Afghanistan to show how people have repaired and retrofitted their houses. The pictures on the right side are from Nepal, and this one is from Afghanistan. So just to summarize, the 3 points that I would like to mention. That first, vernacular materials are not inferior. I wrote this, but then I got worried with the statement I was making, because nowadays I see a lot of practices making very fancy kind of buildings with mud and bamboo, and that sometimes worries me, because the communities you go to, the communities I go to are so poor and so dispossessed that probably mud is the only asset they own. And if that becomes fancy, I wonder someday they may not even have the mud which they have right now. So that worries me. But I do believe that people should continue to design, build, and repair. I don't care for whether we practice, our practices function or not, but people should continue to build their own houses. They should be able to continue to repair their houses, which means they should continue to have access to the materials. People in Garhwal and Uttarakhand don't have access to slate they used to have earlier. No, people will not have access to lime. So people should have agency and the control over their own resources. They should design, build, and repair. And finally, I am not very romantic about vernacular practices. There are problems. There are systems which are broken. There are gaps in the knowledge. traditional knowledge which probably had evolved for thousands of years stopped sometime 200, 300 years back, and it stays at that same level. Cement and concrete and steel and glass, we have done so much research and now we know so much more about it. But we know about soil what we knew probably 500 years back. Our knowledge about mud and bamboo still remains the same. So it is time that we spend resources and energy to learn more about those materials before we think of repairing and retrofitting those houses. I am coming back just now. 2 days back, I returned from Afghanistan. I was in Kabul and Herat. I saw adobe houses with adobe vaults and adobe domes. Now, adobe domes which are cracked, you can see wide gap. And I was wondering that I have absolutely no idea how to repair this. It is much easier. I mean, because of my own lack of knowledge, I was just thinking maybe I should just demolish this dome and rebuild the dome. No, I know how to repair the walls, but I do not know how to repair the dome. So no, there are just so many things which you do not know, and every time my kind of work is such that I don't really visit the same place again. I'm going to new place, and you're encountering new material, new ways of building, and have absolutely no idea what to do. But this whole idea of repair, I just want to also share another instance. Just 2 months back, I had an opportunity to visit Armenia, where almost 1 lakh refugees from Azerbaijan have moved into Armenia. They are Armenian. Yeah, sure. I'll finish it in 1 minute. So from Azerbaijan moved to Armenia, and the government wanted to figure out how to resettle these families. And I found out that in Armenia, being a ex-Soviet country, they have huge housing stock, which is just lying unused, which was owned by municipalities and the government. And when I went there, I thought there was absolutely no need to build any new house. I mean, maybe those are not very romantic looking or very beautiful looking building blocks. Those are just rectangular communist era buildings. But those are there, those are empty, those can just be repaired and used for these houses. So I think there is a lot of varied applications of this idea of repair and retrofitting the buildings. That's all. Thank you so much.
Just come to the mic.
Yeah.
When Rahul called me to participate in this conference, he said he wants to use the word repair. Oh, and he also said that I should link the word repair with my practice. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make an argument. Yes, I agree. I mean, it made me think in an entirely different way how to link. I mean, I do new buildings. I do conservation projects. 50% is conservation, 50% is new buildings. But today I'm not going to show any projects. Today I'm going to show what Rahul told me to present. How is this linked with my practice and sustainability as a whole? It was thought-provoking. One is, I'm looking at the word durability. It has been mentioned in some of the things. Why the word durability is very important. In 1992, World Bank came out with a report called Enabling Markets to Work. It was on housing. When the World Bank changed the policy from site and services scheme to a facilitator approach. Till then, site and services scheme were popular. What they said, unless our housing stock lasts for 75 years, we are never going to solve the housing problem. Buildings should last for at least 75 years, 92, before Kyoto conference. And sustainability, the word sustainability becoming a buzzword. And no country has solved the problem of housing. India, we said 2024, we will solve the housing problem. Now revised the date to 2030. When I passed out, the number of houseless families were 25 million. Now it is above 60 million. In spite of the fact, so many architecture colleges, so many architects, and so many engineers coming up in the profession. One of the reasons we have to understand what is durability. None of the building materials increase in strength over a period of time. You learn that lime increases in strength, cement increases in strength in school textbooks, but it is acted upon by sun and rain alternatively, which is also a problem which we have to look at. And any building which is exposed to the weather is constantly decaying, which we have to understand. Why is it important to have? So what determines durability of a building? There are two factors. Once the necessary quality of the building materials is ensured, I'm not talking about PWD or some of the buildings where yesterday keynote address, it was talked about kickbacks and all. I'm not talking about that. Forgetting about that, once the necessary quality of building materials are ensured, there are two aspects which determines durability. One is design details. The other is quality of workmanship. So I'm going to talk about that. So when you design a dam, there is a time factor. Pakranangal Dam was designed for 90 years because filtration rate is taken into account in the design. But when you design a building, there is no time factor. We don't design a building for 25 years. We don't design it for 50 years. We don't design it for 100 years. But you go to, one of the questions I ask the architectural students whenever I go, how many years will these concrete buildings last? And they will say maximum I get is 75 years. Some say 30 years, some say 50 years, 70 years. When I passed out, my post-graduation is from York University. I'm one of the, Anuradha Chaturvedi, who's sitting here, is my classmate. And I did it in 86, 87. So one of the first persons to have a master's in conservation, one of the first 10 people at least, conservation in India. And there were only 2 books on concrete conservation in 86, 87. Now, if you just Google Amazon, you will find 100 books. There are 1,000 books published on concrete conservation, which means concrete is not a permanent building material. The way we think, if concrete buildings last 75 years, why are our students being taught about concrete and steel? Why are they not taught about timber and mud or earth as a building material? And this is the, now let me come back to durability. What is a design detail? There are hundreds of design details in our vernacular architecture. Personally, I don't like the word vernacular architecture, architecture without architects, non-pedigree architecture, or any of these things. Words can be used. You look at the building on the left. It is my neighbor's building. And you can see that the plastering has been done at the same time. The painting of the exterior facade has been done at the same time. But areas which doesn't have a coping, you can see cracks develop. But under the sunshade, you can see the painting is doing very well. So there is a design detail which is coping. There are hundreds of design details in our vernacular buildings, which unfortunately we fail to look at them. Overhang is one of the traditional detailing. It's a design detail. Overhang is a design detail. So what you do? I'm just on the building on the right is the house which I spent my childhood. It's the lime plaster, 1916 building, doing extremely well. We need to add some more light into the building. So we just cut open this thing and had, it's a lime plaster, very little overhang. It's doing extremely well. The building on the right is my compound wall, 1916 house. The painting is doing well and nothing is happening to the building. You look at this building, these buildings were built post-tsunami earthquake buildings. In the same village, part of the rehabilitation, I did two projects, one in Trankobar and one in Chinangudi, where we customized the houses. So we allowed people to choose the design details. So the one on the left, they did not want the sunshade. And you see the condition of the building 10 years later. These photographs were taken 10 years later. The building on the right, the same thing, but the details were different. And you can see the sunshade and the building, how it is performing now. So the importance of the design details, this determines the durability of a building. Now, what is workmanship? A building with bad workmanship is not durable. If a concrete roof leaks in 5 years, 10 years, 2 years, bad workmanship. It is not because they didn't add proper cement or steel. If a plaster doesn't last, it's because of the bad workmanship. Mostly. If you have, they have added proper cement and sand and in a proper proportion of this thing. This is what I call bad quality of workmanship. We had craftsmen who had traditional knowledge of the thing, and many of the concrete buildings doesn't have durability. The society pays for quantity, not quality. When I was a child, a carpenter used to come and work in my house. He works 3 or 4 days, 4 hours after the 8 hours schedule. He will go and drink after lunch, and then he will disappear at 12:30, come back at 3:30 because he gets drunk. And my grandmother used to, why are you paying this person 1 day's full wage? And my grandfather say, you have to pay for quality and not quantity. Now a mason gets paid at the end of the day by the number of bricks he lays, not the way he lays the bricks. And this is something which you have to address as a profession. Manual labor is no longer respected. Unfortunately, it is not there. We are only construction workers, we don't have craftsmen. And many of the discussions which we had earlier, we are talking of craftsmanship. Now, what is craftsmanship? A craftsman understands the technology of his craft. He is not a construction. He just doesn't know how to lay the bricks. He knows why to lay, which way to learn the bricks. Lay the bricks is very important. And he can give leadership to good quality work. So quality of construction comes into play. And quality of construction is what determines the durability of a building, which is very important. What happened? Labor contract and overtime led to this. The additional cost in attaining a better quality construction, even in new buildings, is very little. It's like doing a good, neat handwriting and a bad handwriting. You train the masons to do good handwriting. That is what is required. Why don't the building professionals don't get involved in this? See this building, it started leaking and it came to the state in 5 years. Concrete leaking. You can blame the contractor, but bad workmanship. Let me tell you, technology failed to find this sustainable solution in the era of climate change for many issues we are facing. 21st century technology, how we are sending people to the moon, but technology failed. And one of the things is the climate emergency we are facing, which is a serious issue that we are facing. In 1973, Architectural Review magazine carried an article, which was a cover page article, and they titled the article as Flat Roof Scandal. And the article says that concrete buildings can never be done faultless. Concrete buildings will leak after a period of time. Because even in, they said, they did a survey of the crown buildings, which was, crown means the buildings, public buildings in, government-owned buildings. And they said 1/3 of the concrete buildings are leaking in UK. And forget, if you do such a study in India, instead of 1/3, we might find 1/3 of the buildings not leaking, which is a very, very thing. So we have to look at technology and looking at how technology failed to find solutions for this thing. What we have to understand, there is no shortcut to good craftsmanship. Construction chemicals cannot replace good quality workmanship. When I started my career 40 years ago, toilets were, no waterproofing were done on toilets. The quality of work was much good. Now it has become a norm to do waterproofing of the toilets and waterproofing of the entire roof. We are relying on construction chemicals. And if you go to any exhibitions, construction exhibition, there are 2-3 things which you will find. One is the bathroom fixtures and tiles. The other will be the construction chemicals, and third will be the kitchen accessories and things like that, which are making the money. and long-term durability of buildings, and will means less repairs to the new buildings that we do. The biggest crisis the construction industry is facing today is lack of quality of construction. And if you have good quality of construction, buildings will be better built and no need for much of the repairs. As a practice, this is what we try to do, and this will lead to sustainability in the long run, which is very, very important. What is sustainability are we talking about if the buildings can last only 25 years? And what sustainability are we talking about when every third building develops a leak within 25 years of its operation? Have we thought about this? I think it is important that the building professionals needs to look at these things. And let me bring in one more dimension to this issue, which is building maintenance. The great thing in building maintenance is the old English proverb, a stitch in time. If a shirt has a stitch in time, saves 9. Unfortunately, we don't. We look at a building when it's nearing collapse, and then you ask 4 or 5 conventional engineers and architects who will say, no, it has to be demolished. And finally, if the client is okay, then he will approach a conservation architect who said the building can be repaired. We are doing one repair of a building. The client is telling you are the 25th person I'm approaching, and I'm happy that you have saved the building. So this is something which is our profession geared for these things. And some of the present day buildings built with concrete require huge maintenance costs. Why are we not looking at it from a sustainability and climate emergency? The problem is just around the corner. I was thinking, I've been following in sustainability. I was thinking that I will never have to face the global warming or the climate change issues, but I'm facing it now. I'm sure I thought only my grandchildren will have to face it. My children are definitely going to face it. I'm facing it. I hope to live for another 20 years where this thing will be there. Another 25 years, one more prediction I would like to do, government will have to put a ban on new construction. There is no other way to go. All these 3 days ago, all these heads of governments decided 1.5 degrees centigrade they have to bring. You look at the deliberations which has happened from the Kyoto or the Paris or any of those conferences, 1.5, 0.5. I mean, if we are able to keep it, the present thing itself is important. When we build new buildings, we have not only look at the initial cost of construction, we have to look at the maintenance cost as well. We have to look at sustainability in the long-term perspective, which is important. I'm giving 2 statistics. You might not agree with this. Various books are giving, but it is estimated that 1/3 of the output of the construction and building industry is for the maintenance of the buildings. 1/3 of the estimates, which is a substantial amount of money we put for the repair of buildings or maintenance of the buildings. This is one statistics. I would like to tell you one more statistic. 1/5 of the total cost of repairs is spent on the rectification of defects arising from errors in design or construction. It's not the sun and rain which is acting on the building. 1/5 of the total cost of repairs is bad design and bad construction. This is also, there are some statistics which will say 40% repairs is spent on bad design and construction, but I've taken a very conservative figure, and this is where the conservation of buildings becomes very important. When you do conservation of building, this is the greenest thing that you can do because you are conserving, you are recycling the whole building. Reuse and recycle is the thing. The greenest building is one which is already existing because it has made its impact on the environment already. So this becomes and it conserves energy, it conserves material, it uses 40% less amount of materials than more labor. And here it comes to the moderator suggestions that why can't we look at ordinary buildings being conserved? Yes, government will have to come with a similar to lockdown that no buildings can be demolished unless they are 75 years or 100 years old, will have to be looked at. This is very, very critical. No matter how much greener technology you use now, even the most platinum rated building, I will say a conserved building, a building which is conserved is much more, many times more greener than the building which is done because you are recycling the whole building, which is the best of the thing. So integrate all these things when you look at the future. our professionals are insufficiently trained to look at these things, unfortunately. They are not taught about air, they are not about timber, they are not taught about lime, they are not taught only the advantages of concrete and steel, not the disadvantages of concrete and steel. And one advantage, because of my conservation training, which I get, I'm not an architect, I didn't study architecture, but I have a master's in conservation by which I learned how to look at the materials and techniques and construction things in an entirely different way. It helped me look at how to design new buildings. And because when I passed out in 1987, there were no conservation projects. You had to wait. Now there are plenty of conservation projects, which is there. We had to look at a major shift in our thinking, the profession as a whole. Our designs will improve tremendously if we look at minimum repairs being carried out in new buildings in the future. And this is what the core point of my practice is. We look at how can we minimize the repairs which can be carried out in future. Having minimum repairs should become the prime objective of our mainstream practice. Have minimum repairs in the future, because this is required for sustainability, for fighting the climate change, for fighting the global warming. And for this, we have to learn the design details. We have to ensure that good craftsmanship, good workmanship is brought into the system. And without that, it is impossible to look at things in an entirely different way. Let us hope that all of us will shift towards good workmanship and good design details, which means you have to look at vernacular architecture, which means you have to look at new buildings in an entirely different way. And that is what our practice tries to do. You can look at, Rahul wanted to show some projects, but due to 12 minutes, I don't have. You can look at our website and other things to look at our projects. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. A very big thank you to all our panelists. Khadija, of course, has not been able to present, so we have 3 on stage and none on the screen. I know it's the end of the day, and I can see sort of fatigue setting in on the faces around me, but we'll try and keep it short. But I think we had, in a way, what Benny did is a kind of a summary of what we started with previous to this session. And of course, what everybody said. I think the second session threw up some of the questions that were being asked in the previous session as answers, in fact. And we had Rohit and Vivek talk about post-disaster building. Both of them talked about the way the community came together. What was fascinating is the fact that people, the community is held together by a belief system, which was very evident in your case study, where despite the idol being not there, or the temple rather, the temple itself not being there, people continued to pray at that site after having put back whatever they could collect. And I think that is what probably helped the conservation effort, though you had difficulties with the idol itself and you had to install a new one subsequently. Vivek's case was also that how do you actually bring enthusiasm and confidence back into the community to get them to rebuild rather than any agency come in and build probably RCC buildings, which Benny very rightly says is not really the solution. And I think he made several important points, but one of the most important points that he made was the fact that we continue to teach RCC as the de facto way of construction. When students and teachers develop designs, you never question what is the way you are going to construct this thing, because that has significance, as we all know, on the way the plans evolve. the kind of spans you do, the kind of openings you leave on the walls, and therefore finally how the building behaves or even looks. So I think, there is a lot to take away, and to blame Rahul again that because the repair, this time I'm just joking, but looking at repair as an agenda or as even as an alternative profession is really the way by which you can address these issues which otherwise are swept under the carpet. I think that's one of the things that I take away from the discussions that happened today. So I'll actually ask Anisha to ask the question. I just sort of did a summary of what was said, because she had several points which we have not talked of as to take away for the future. So please ask the questions, and of course the audience, welcome.
Yes, so very quickly, I'll try to summarize what I took away from your presentations and from the panel before that. And I think what is happening is that we are sort of circling back to the meaning and the function and domain of repair. And what it means different things to different people. So for instance, in Ranjit's presentation, what you showed is that sometimes even the idea of repair, not just the idea of conservation, but the idea of repair, which we think is a fact of societies, traditional societies, for want of a better word, they might reject the idea of repair, as with the idol. And as Vivek said, we as professionals, we lack knowledge of repair. So while we may think or we may want to implement or get back repair in the mainstream, we don't know how to do it because we don't have the knowledge to do so. And what Benny also demonstrated, I think finally, is that it's not just a reduction in the number of new buildings, but also in the reduction of the need for repair. So therefore, repair as maintenance. Maintenance is preemptive repair in a sense. So there are all these different meanings of repair. And I think what we probably need to think about is something that was brought up in the last session, which is the word itself. So repair, so sort of the hyphen that you talked about, which means what do you pair with? And that's both in terms of collaborations as well as in terms of philosophies. So repair, and this is something that Rahul Singh had brought up, and he made this very provocative statement that repair is conservation, perhaps without responsibility. And I said, well, I think repair is perhaps conservation without the limitations of a charter. However, I think what we are all coming back to is that how do you make repair more inclusive without reducing the rigor of repair? So does everything go as repair, or do we need certain let's say certain protocols of repair, both for ourselves as professionals, as well as for people who are not architects, but who inhabit buildings and who have perhaps been repairing them over a long time. So therefore, what I'm coming back to again is the same question: how do you make repair an attractive proposition, and with both as a word and as a way for architects to practice?
So I would actually, taking this cue, I would ask Benny here. So do you think, as a hypothetical thing, that what you suggested, that the government will have to ban new construction? Now, do you think if that actually happened, that will immediately put the focus on to repair? I mean, there's no other way that you can, would you say that's one way to make sure that repair becomes mainstream? Is there a microphone? Yeah.
See,
Okay, so,
I was just making a provocative statement, but I believe this. One of the other statements I make in many other conferences that all these UN statistics says that the urbanization is continuing by 2060, 70% of the world's population. I think reverse migration has to happen. Otherwise, we will not be able to survive as a community, because building professionals are the least aware about the consequences of global warming and climate change, which is happening. In the 2015 floods in Chennai, there was a flood last week. It was worse than the 2015 floods. 2018 floods happened in Kerala. I wrote a book on how to mitigate floods. And people said 1924 is the earlier flood, so next flood will be 100 years later. But I mean, 2 more floods have come. Bangalore has floods in the summer. March calipers. I mean, this is what is happening.
Every
So
day.
let us look at the number of disasters being on the increase. And I strongly believe what the 3,000 climate scientists believe of the IPCC, which means if we don't control this, things are going to change. So that is, and I, as a professional, building professional, has a responsibility to tell it to the public that this is very, very important. I'm not talking about the repairs. As I said earlier, it is we can do buildings with detailing and workmanship so that we had to spend very little on the repairs. I use concrete, but the concrete should be used in such a way it is durable. Where it is required. So I'm not anti-concrete or anything. Many of buildings, there are a lot of concrete I use in my buildings, but concrete, when it is exposed to sun and rain, it is not durable because every day it has to expand and contract. So then it's not durable. So you have to study the science. Unfortunately, the traditional craftsmen knew about the science. That's what a craftsmanship is. You know about the science behind it. But now the architects and engineers doesn't know the science behind it, how a concrete performs.
So I have a related question. So therefore, would you say that without craftspeople, you cannot have repair as in green, because you said repair is the only way to go green. So without the craft skills, then are you saying that we can't have that?
No, I'm not saying that. I think that the new building architects and engineers should learn about our techniques and our materials. They should have deep knowledge. As I said, I don't have a degree in architecture, but I do new buildings as well as conservation of buildings. I learned by learning from the craftsmen. I worked 9 months with Laurie Baker, that is true, but there are people who have worked 9 years with Laurie Baker. So I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just trying to say that the kind of learning, the kind of experience, my learning has been with the craftsman. Yeah. Which made me look at things. Because the craftsman don't think it is his knowledge. He has knowledge, but he doesn't see it as knowledge. We as professionals, because we are learned in the university, we have degrees, we think, oh, it's a great knowledge. I mean, when we learn a little bit of the traditional craftsman knowledge, we project it. So, they don't know.
So actually, that is the point which I'd like to ask Rohit and Vivek to elaborate on. Because you both worked with craftspeople. In Vivek's case, you have to find the craftspeople amongst the people who are already in that vulnerable state. But in your case, I guess you have a living tradition of craftspeople. So would you like to explain?
We have actually still lots of building in our country. So the craftsmanship is still alive. So it's not only the building or temple, which I saw it's a living culture. That's the monument, right? But we still have a living, craftsmanship, right? And they're continuing that skill generation to generation. We never had any vocational school to train them. So once I know the family name of the people in the Kathmandu Valley, which is the Newar community, and I can tell like what is their ancestral profession. So they are still carrying that. But now slowly, because the modernization, cement, concrete, this and that, and also in our culture, I'm pretty sure also most of the country in South Asia, the craftsmen are not considered as a higher status thing in the society. So no parents wants to make their children what they used to do in old days. So everybody is changing and modernizing, and I don't blame them, right? So somehow the skill will die. We know that. And these are skills which you cannot train like in few months or year, because it has evolved from practice. Like, my hypothetical analysis, what I like to say is, in old days when there is no school and college, so kids are playing as human nature, they also tired with playing. Then they look what their father, grandfather is doing, and they keep practicing, copying from the childhood. This is how they learn. It need like decades to be a good craftsman. You cannot teach them like within like few months. And there are so many training programs, especially after the 2015 earthquake, which was like 3 months, 4 months. You can do some regular masonry or carpentry, but you cannot learn specific like wood carving, metal carving, stone carving within like a few months, even couple of years, right? So this is why the craftsman, the generation, I say like let's say like last generation, there are only a handful of people. I know only 2 people in my entire life who like following my younger than me. They follow their father's ancestral occupation, but no one really does that. I mean, everybody is going to office, engineer, doctor, whatever, going abroad, So this is the problem.
So, sorry, stemming from what you said. So, as architects, I mean, we were talking about responsibilities. So, how do we incentivize the the continuation of such skills?
This is something we also try to bring more people in the field, because we are working since 91, and we have restored about 100 plus buildings in the Kathmandu Valley. And every project we have a couple of trainees. So someone who want to learn the crafts. So we always keep them together with the skilled people. But sometimes we have also a problem with the skilled people. They don't want to teach. Because, they don't, it's like inherited, right? So I mean, it's not because they take their business now. Maybe in old days, they might worry about why I should teach the other caste, they will take my business. But now there is no people want to learn, but still there are, they don't want to teach. And there are few people, even from the different community, different caste, who want to learn. We always invite them. I mean, we cannot run the vocational school because we are not a big organization, but we always have a couple of people, and there are several people who are working with us more than a decade. So we try like like a what do you say, like a piecemeal, or in a smaller scale.
So in your case, Vivek, I remember when you did the Kosi River flooding thing, you worked with the community. So did you find people who have the knowledge, like what Rohit is talking about, or you had to train them?
Well, I think Nepal and Bhutan both are places where traditions are much more alive and part of life. In India, it has been much more difficult. But just now, when I was in Afghanistan, I just interviewed 2 master masons who've been working with Adobe and mud with excellent knowledge about the materials. So whatever knowledge, in fact, I think all of us would agree on mud or bamboo, whatever knowledge we have gained and we have used in our buildings, it's not from our architecture education, it's from the artisans.
So it's like on
It's
field
the
research.
artisans who taught us. But just one point I wanted to make about the when you said about the practice of repair, how do we? I was thinking that when I was a child, if my shirt was torn, and I'll tell my mother that shirt is torn, repairing the shirt is the most natural response. She will never tell me that, okay, she is buying a new shirt for me. Nothing. She'll repair the shirt. So if the house is damaged or if there is a problem, repairing the house should be the most natural response. Why would anybody want to change the house?
Yeah.
I think it is the extreme capitalist, consumerist culture that we have all got into.
It's a testimony
where
of our
you think
times.
of, change the apartment.
So yeah, we take a couple of questions because we have to wind up. So yes, please.
Hi, my name is Pranav. I have a question in how do you anticipate the practice of repair being being a practice in the mainstream in the future. Since we've been talking about models of practice, what sorts of collaborations or what sorts of interdisciplinary practice do you think we need to go towards to actually make it really happen, given all the shortcomings in the organizational structures or in our education that we have as of now?
There's another question. Can we take both of them together, perhaps, and then we could.
Thank you. My question is for Rohit. What a great point you made about, say, the repair of an idol was not necessarily considered very appropriate by a certain community of worshippers. So I'm thinking, what would be the status of a repaired or refurbished temple? Just as you showed us an example, how was that temple received by the community after it was refurbished?
Do we have one more question there? Two more.
Thank you, Ekeja. Repair is a very good concept and a new concept. I think it's a very relevant for planners. I am a planner, architect planner, for planners to conceive the master plans so that no new construction is encouraged. But at the same time, what about the builders lobby, which is very strong and very prevailing?
So, Rohit, you mentioned that the craftsmen are not teaching. And I find that because just like in any other, what you call tiered setting, here, as older you get, a mason doesn't get higher pay than the mason who is entering. And for that skill, he doesn't get higher pay, he doesn't get insurance, he doesn't get any kind of health benefits, anything. And that's a very important factor. If you bring in this kind of attention to paying for skills with higher pays, they'll surely be able to teach. And that's something which we have to recognize. And like Benny said, no respect for labor is something which we have to change.
I think that's where the architects can play a big role in their own projects, the way they deal with it. There was somebody there.
One more question.
Actually, there are two or three more, so why don't we get...
Okay. Who would like to answer the last few questions?
Yeah. So like in terms of statue and temple, I'll answer you first. Temple is considered in general like a building, right? And you saw like the people are worshipping the idol without temple also, right? So somehow the statue is more important. That is what their focus is. That is, architecture is not important for the religious people. The idol, the holy site is important. So this way, even like, if I build modern concrete temple with glossy tile, they will be more happier than what I do. So this is, I think, very Asian mentality. And the temple where they like worshipping, actually the image was not damaged, so they worshipping without temple also. But the temple where I saw the new small replica, they don't want to worship in that image because it's broken. I remember like in my house, it's like very typical, I guess, in Nepal. I don't know, like in other countries. I remember, when I was a kid, I never thought about that. Every house has a small space for the worshipping, like, images. And one of the images like just fall down from the shelf and it chipped out. Then my grandmother, like, did not use that. He bring to the field and he just put it there. They never worship that. So that is what I remembering later and when, this happened. So that is somehow still living culture. So you cannot like, you don't really worship the broken or chipped out image. On other hand, actually, I saw like other picture where the wood carver is repairing the carving. That is also not easy because nobody liked that idea. So it is more like a historic preservation. It's not traditional. Like I say in earlier, in older centuries, they just replace it, everything. So we like in between like modernization and the, I mean, not modernization, we like in between the historic preservation and the local belief. So like I said, when I go to the temple, I don't know which deity I like to worship. I like to worship the old one because I love the historic elements which carries like a few centuries of history, or I should believe like what people normally believe. So this, and also, I cannot argue with replacing like keeping the old statue, but I make lots of argument with repairing the wood carvings, and it took long time to talk to the community than doing my own job, right? And the government officials, they cannot do that because they know like, oh, you are doing wrong, please stop, and nobody stops, right? So normally I live around, so I like meet them every day for tea, coffee, whatever, and I never talk formally. It's just like informally, I need to talk and convince, and slowly, we have. So now, after so many temples rebuilt, restored after the earthquake, now people slowly understanding, the value of the old things. So this is how, and I think I also have another question about the higher payment paying. In fact, it does not make big difference. We also pay better than the government rate. Nobody works in the government rate, but it's still like it's not only the higher salary or thing, it's more, come back to the status. I don't want to tell my friends like, oh, my son is carpenter like me, right? I will, oh, my son is doctor, my son is engineer. That's prestigious thing, And just like going to the grassroots, if you say like, my son is carpenter, nobody wants to marry him.
You have a microphone? Yes.
And Chitra's question, the payment is quite high for carpenters and masons. In Chennai standard, they get 1,000 rupees, 1,200 rupees. Let me tell you, a 22-year-old mason earns more than an architect in an office of the same age. So you can't say, but the payment doesn't go up telescopically the way the actors, but it is something, but more of the status symbol. Now, Pranav's question, if you look at, say, UK, for example, they don't see conservation architect as a separate profession. There it has merged with the mainstream. So here also, the repairs and all these things will merge with the mainstream in the future. That's what is likely to happen. So if you don't have the knowledge, you will be forced to acquire the knowledge because you have to deal with projects of such a nature. The thing is that some people try to mystify these things and try to keep it to themselves. And that is what, unfortunately, I mean, it's happening in every field. Not only this, it happens in the medical field, it happens in the other field. Those who practice something different, they try to mystify it.
Are there there's some more questions? Okay, one here. So let's take this.
So thank you, Rohit, Vivek, and Benny. That was very provocative. It might be difficult to frame this, but perhaps I can start in the context of disaster mitigation. And there are these sort of three phases. There's rehab, recovery, and redevelopment. And I was wondering, why aren't we talking about an architecture of impermanence? Why are we talking about an architecture which is 75 years, 100 years, 150 years? But what about, experimenting with new ideas, innovating with new ideas, where architecture is just sort of is nomadic in that sense, and we can sort of flesh out these ideas.
Thank you. I think the last comment, Mr. Vivek, that you made about cultures and behaviors is why I'm back into a conversation. I wanted each of you to unpack the word community over here. Because when I hear Rohitji talk about it's a community which comes together because of indigenous livelihoods, when Vivekji, you talk about community, it's displacement and refuge in a way which makes you build for each other, perhaps in both the cases. But when we talk about community today, the real estate really puts you aloof in your privacy, just be, you don't even know who lives next door. So we don't engage with each other. How do we engage with buildings? How do we engage with spaces? Because this whole idea of caring, I'm going to bring back the word caring for architecture, because of which you would repair it, comes as a collective. So somebody would stitch my clothes and I would need to go to them, or I need to know which fabric to look for. That conversation is so important. So simply put, how do you unpack the word community over here and the sense of a collective, which I think is very critical to want to repair anything. अकेले तो नहीं होगा.
Uh, like the example which I showed from Patan Darbar Square, luckily most of the people who are living since generation to generation is still living there. Of course, not 100%, but like at least 70, 80%, and even like the family number is growing, so everybody need more space. So some people already relocated, but they have not sold the house as their ancestral house. So whenever, in such cases, we have festival, like one of the slide I saw at the end. So there are still like thousands of people coming to the, festival, and even they go out during the festival, during the such religious activities, they come back to the community. But luckily, as I said, in Patan Darbar Square, we have more people and they more care about that. And also, actually, many people have a negative saying about the earthquake, but I found there are lots of positive issues also, because I never thought like, community as so close to each other, and the earthquake bring them together, and it is an advantage of the earthquake also. And also now I feel like they are loving more monuments or heritage than before. They care about that. And also it is, the square is a very touristic area, and that also makes them making more money from the businesses. There are so many things tying together. So I believe, not actually not in all places. If you see in the Kathmandu Darbar Square, it is a little bit different. And we have three small towns. And in Bhaktapur is more than Patan, actually. They are more close to, they were living more, how used to live there. And Patan is in between. So this is how it is.
I think it is difficult to define we all use the word community very loosely, actually. Social divisions are strong. But one thing which Ranjit also pointed out, after a disaster, the collective energy, it happens because everybody has suffered and they are in the same problems. So it is much easier to get people together, but to sustain that feeling of continue to work together is very difficult. And I have seen all kinds of situations where what NGOs do, what government comes out with, and how local politics plays. There are times, coming from Gujarat, I have seen an extremely good collective behavior which continued, and we had a very highly successful reconstruction and rehabilitation. But there are all kinds of situations I have been into where families break, brothers stop talking to each other, and all kinds of things happen. So it's not only, and how the crux of the whole issue could be the housing, how rehabilitation or recovery is taking place. And a lot of time in my conversations, more than what happens to the building and what happens to the technology, you are more concerned about what we are doing to the community. And that becomes a much bigger issue to reflect upon for myself.
Just on the community, I worked with communities in various projects. Worked in Gujarat in Design One Village in Maharashtra, Latur earthquake. I've done 2 tsunami rehabilitation projects. Just talking not any particular project. One thing is that many of the NGOs think that they know what the community needs. Wrong concept. One point. The second point, the process of construction or repairs is very important. In that process, the trust of the community goes up. And that is if you don't get the trust of the community, you will break up with the community. I showed one example where I have done a the tsunami rehabilitation project where we gave 7 models to the community. They can choose any of the 7 options. And once they choose any of the 7 options, they can customize it. Somebody can decide not to have a veranda. Somebody can decide to have shelves. I don't want to go detail into the project. The community should score goals. I mean, like in a football game, it is not the NGO, it is not the architect who should score the goals. Once the architect is aware of this, then the process will go smoothly. If the architect thinks that I am a god, I know everything, this is what the community, then the project will be. When I started the tsunami rehabilitation projects where houses were customized, more than 1,700 houses were constructed. We got the support of the community, and there were housing experts who came and told me, Benny, you will not be able to complete the project, but we completed the project. When the NGO which supported, the aid agency, ran out of money, the government had the World Bank aid. The government said, we will do the construction because now let you people get out. The villagers made a demonstration to Chennai city and said, we want the old people to construct. We are ready to wait. So that confidence, the trust you can win from the community is what will drive the project. I can give umpteen number of examples of projects which we have worked in various places, not only the tsunami rehabilitation or anything, even in the conservation projects where we got the support of the community, and that becomes very critical.
Yes, thank you. I think that's a very important point about building relationships and building trust. And I think that's one aspect of repair is also giving up control, which is very difficult for architects to do. So we were hoping, to explore the potential meanings of repair in our 2 sessions. And I think we've done that. I don't know, we probably more confused in some ways, but our minds are certainly opened up by the kind of work that we've seen and the kind of, thought processes it's given us fodder to think about. And there's obviously not the end. We are going to keep finding the meanings of repair, but I just want to end with what we had written earlier and something for us to go back, and we can always add to this. So repair as maintenance, repair as upgradation, repair as conservation, repair as renewal, repair as progression, repair as progressiveness, repair as a new aspiration for architecture, we hope, and repair as continuity of traditions. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I think Rahul wants to end the session, but I just wanted to say one thing here from Benny's presentation. So about detailing a building correctly. And we have a living example, not in this building, but the ones where some of you are staying, by Mr. Stein, whose complex wherein I'm fortunate enough to be employed by him for a couple of years. So I've seen how he was obsessive about how you must detail things correctly, such that it lasts. And probably the best example, not just the Indian International Center, where he didn't have a cap on the budget, but the building which he did, according to him, in shoestring, is the Triveni Kala Sangam, which is older than the Indian National Center. Until date, it didn't require much repair. Yes, they have been repairing it, but not to the extent that we are talking about over here. So I entirely agree with Benny's point that good design also starts, or a repair, or the lack of repair or maintenance is related directly to craftsmanship and to detailing. So that's what I want to say.
Thanks, Snehanshu and Anisha and the panel. No, I just wanted to say a couple of things which came to mind. Benny, when I think to the question of Pranav, what came to mind was this whole shift we have made in our practice from weathering to weatherproofing, right? And we forgot, I mean, the examples you showed of the images and the images that we see from more traditional architecture is how you deal essentially with weathering. And I think your provocation, just simple copings, elements, right? It's all about how buildings weather versus what we do with sealants and double glass and where the Alloco bond, things that won't weather. This idea that age can't happen. And it's interesting that what your provocation for me was that we should actually be developing a kit of parts, almost like a metric in terms of how one can, actually measure that, which is really interesting. Nuru's question didn't get answered, and I hope we can pick it up because it's a very important one, which is, I think, for repair, very pertinent. And I think I've raised it earlier, this notion of life cycle of materials, right? And I think, Benny, you brought that up too, because you took on contemporary architecture more upfront, whereas Rohit and, of course, Vivek brought it down to the domestic level. But life cycles of materials, we are losing track of. We can actually be quite deliberate in terms of if we understand those metrics, right? I mean, there's a wonderful diagram by Rem Koolhaas, which is about conservation, where he talks about how, from the first charters and commissions, the gap between the legislation that was protecting an object and the birth of that object was 200, 300, 400 years old. That is diminishing. Like you saw in the previous session, we were worrying about buildings that are 50 years old, correct? And now there is also people who are worrying about buildings that are even more recent because they're using many intangible criteria for conservation. So his provocation was that that time will collapse, which means the implication of that is now when you go for building permission, you will, one of the boxes that the sanctions authority will have to check whether is this building going to be listed in the future, which means you can almost decide prospectively what might be conserved. It's an interesting provocation because it's related to the idea of how one might design that building, and you might actually design a building that only lasts for 10 years, it's reversible, all the material can be recycled to be configured in some other form, right? So that's a whole different imagination, which I think your question was beginning to suggest. And so these are complex questions, and Anisha, you said maybe we're more confused. I always tell my students in today's world, if you're confused, it just means you're thinking clearly, right? Because it's such a complex world. For tomorrow, we are moving really to practitioners, which is interesting. There are going to be 3 sessions, 4 sessions on positioning practice through material and making, through shifting the mainstream, and through questions of patronage. And I think our lineup tomorrow is really practitioners. And the idea was today to have this kind of more reflexive landscape of thinking. And tomorrow we can actually begin to test some of this in the work the practitioners show us and articulate. And I think it could make for very interesting discussion. So very much look forward to that and hope you'll all participate again and be part of that discussion, including everyone who's on Zoom and participating virtually. Thanks again to the 2 panels of the afternoon and the discussions. Anisha and Snehanshu, thank you.